Hello, hello, hello. Hi, everybody. So the Thursday poll question, it's Merconish.com with a hat tip to my buddy Danny Savalos, with whom I was going back and forth last night. It is as follows. Should citizenship be automatically granted to those born in the United States to parents who are in the country illegally or temporarily? First, let me thank my friends at Parks Casino, New York, Philadelphia, Detroit baseball, plus pro golf, MMA fights, pro hoops, the hockey playoffs. It's an exciting time of year. Live bet it all and wager and watch. Live betting is better on the Bet Parks app in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, and on the Play Gun Lake app in Michigan. You can bet individual player performances. In baseball, that means hits and home runs and RBIs and strikes, or points, rebounds, and more on pro hoops playoffs. Whether your favorite team wins or not, there's always another way to win on the Bet Park Sportsbook and online casino app, and Play Gun Lake Sportsbook and online casino app. The only apps that I ever use and recommend to others. You can also play blackjack and craps and poker and hot online slots. They've got them all. Cash Eruption, 88 Fortunes, Cleopatra. And then there are those that are based on your favorite streamers like Walking Dead, Squid Game, Breaking Bad, a lot of fun stuff. By the way, I am loving the studio on, what is that on Apple TV. It is so great. That is my current new show. New users get up to $1,000 casino bonus back if you're down in the first 24 hours. You've got to be 21. And in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, or Maryland for the Bet Parks app, 21. And in Michigan for the Play Gun Lake app. You love to play. You play to win. You bet. Bet Parks on the Bet Parks and Play Gun Lake apps. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. All right. Hello, everyone, on this Thursday. Yesterday, Wednesday, 5 p.m. hour, 6 p.m. hour, I was working out, as is my habit at about that time of day, often as I'm looking at all the cable outlets. Yeah, I spend a lot of time on the 5 because I like their story selection, and I like the combination of personalities. Harold Ford is my favorite on the 5. And knew him back in the day when we would do some appearances together on MSNBC. Anyway, last night, however, I was keenly interested to see what new revelations CNN would present based on the brand new book, the forthcoming book from Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson. And indeed, Jake had another release of information from that book, which has created quite a buzz in Washington, even though it doesn't come out until Tuesday. It's already been reviewed in the New York Times. It's already been reviewed in the Washington Post. The excerpt from the New Yorker that I talked about extensively yesterday, getting a lot of attention. And then Axios is also promoting the book. So it's one of those books that's everywhere. It's one of those books that's everywhere. And remember, the initial installment, the focus really was the encounter between George Clooney and then President Biden, June 2024, at that fundraiser in Los Angeles. Biden coming back, apparently jet lagged from a meeting with the G7 leaders. I think it was G7. I know that he'd been in Italy just the day before, gets off the plane, tired, hadn't slept well. And according to the report, doesn't recognize George Clooney, with whom he had some level of a superficial relationship over the span of 15 years. And Clooney was also one of the celebrity co-hosts of this fundraiser, apparently the most successful fundraiser in the history of political fundraising. And of course, he's a well-known, world-class A-list movie star. We talked about this yesterday. I said that I believe that Biden was diminished as president. I have a, clear track record, for better or worse, of having said when it mattered a year ago, more than that, I don't think he should run for re-election. But I didn't draw great significance from the Clooney anecdote. And we talked about that on radio yesterday. Many of you disagreed with me. TC disagreed with me. That's okay. The new installment, the new revelation yesterday, as per Tapper on CNN and Alex Thompson in Politico, Axios. I'm looking at Axios's coverage. Headline: some members of former President Biden's cabinet lacked confidence that the president could be relied on to respond to a crisis in the middle of the night. So report CNN's Jake Tapper and Axios's Alex Thompson in the forthcoming book, Original Sin. And then from the Axios coverage, cabinet secretaries were kept away from the president as their concerns over his health mounted in the last year of the term, according to the book. And I read all the coverage, and I listened to Jake's report last night on CNN. It wasn't clear to me that it was attributable to the president's frailty as opposed to a concentration of power. I mean, Anthony Blinken and Lloyd Austin had plenty of exposure to President Biden throughout the course of his presidency. By the way, I just met Blinken for the first time. I didn't realize he has a, here's a little trivia for you. He has a Delco wife. Anthony Blinken is married to a woman from Delaware County. But my point is, the two of them had, like, if Biden were so diminished and we've got to keep the cabinet away, then why was he still interacting with Blinken and Austin? It could just be a scheduling issue. It could just be a concentration of power issue. I know right now we're all seeing Donald Trump and he's interacting with his cabinet and they bring in the cameras. We'll see how long that lasts. I think that's typical, not the cameras, but I think that's typical of the early stages of a presidency. What I'm saying is, don't compare the lack of cabinet meetings in the final year of the Biden administration to what's going on in the first 100 plus days of the Trump administration, because I don't think that's apples to apples. The book says, according to a cabinet secretary, and I think Jake said that he'd interviewed 3, for months we didn't have access to him. There was clearly a deliberate strategy by the White House to have him meet as few people as necessary. When they did meet, the cabinet secretary was, quote, shocked by how the president was acting. He seemed disoriented and out of it, his mouth agape. Anybody with a television set, I think, saw similar things. But what I keep asking and what I keep looking for in all the reports that are coming from the book, and by the way, if this existed, I think this would have been the excerpt in The New Yorker, not the Clooney anecdote or vignette. What I keep waiting for is, where's the example of the President Joe Biden who could not fulfill his duties because he was diminished? We saw what we saw. We've all been through it with loved ones, but I'm waiting for that evidence, and I haven't seen it yet. The story of how it actually negatively impacted his functioning on the job. He couldn't respond to this call. He couldn't decide in this crisis. He worsened the posture of the United States. Whatever it might be, where is it? I want to know. And maybe between now and Tuesday, we'll learn something when the book comes out. In any event, that's a long-winded way of me telling you that yesterday we had 32,780 votes cast on this poll question in efforts to shield President Biden from scrutiny over his health, because I think that clearly took place. Were his aides primarily engaged in a rationalization, or was it deliberate scheming? 53.04% said rationalization. A caller said that was a poorly worded poll question. And I agreed. Yeah, not my finest effort, but I think you knew where I was going. Was it a deliberate cover-up, or were they rationalizing and saying, hey, Trump is an existential threat, so we got to do what we got to do? The fact that I have to explain it tells you it was not the best of poll questions. Aha! But today is a great poll question because it requires very little in terms of explanation. I will, however, give you the background. Should citizenship be automatically granted to those born in the United States to parents who are in the country illegally or temporarily? Two different things, by the way. As Trump says, why would we reward a tourist who touched the sand with the benefits of American citizenship? Last night, I went back and forth with Danny Savalos, who'll be on today's program talking about Diddy, but I'm sure I'll ask Danny about this as well. But I had just moderated one day prior a continuing legal education seminar with Danny and with other legal experts, Ellie among them. But Danny's subject matter was birthright citizenship. So I wanted to tap into, him being very recently conversant, a deep dive on this, and ask him about my poll question. And we went back and forth. And then I ended up sticking with the wording that I'd I'd written originally. This case, which is the predicate for my making this the poll question today, is being argued in front of the Supreme Court of the United States. As a matter of fact, this morning. It's really about injunctions. Birthright citizenship is playing a secondary role. And I don't know whether when the decision comes out, it's really going to address birthright citizenship on the merits. As the Washington Post points out in their coverage today, the Supreme Court will consider whether federal judges have the power to single-handedly stop the president through nationwide injunctions, one of liberal activists' preferred tactics to challenge or block the Trump administration policies. Republicans say that amounts to judges weaponizing the bench for their political agendas, but it hasn't stopped the GOP from engaging in similar behavior. Well, Michael, why are you asking about birthright citizenship if today the Supreme Court of the United States is taking up a case relative to injunctions? The answer is the backdrop, the context is birthright citizenship. So birthright citizenship is one of two related issues in front of the SCOTUS today. How far they get into the essence of birthright citizenship, I don't know. I always like Amy Howe's coverage at SCOTUS blog. Anytime there's a big Supreme Court argument, you can rest assured that the newsletter is going to contain her reporting. I think she does a great job. And we had a link from Amy yesterday. She said, on May 15, that's today, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in the federal government's efforts to be able to generally implement President Trump's executive order ending birthright citizenship, the guarantee of citizenship to virtually everyone born in the U.S. In other words, the way these two intersect is the Trump by executive order sought to end birthright citizenship. And then a number of district court judges blocked him. And the administration response, the government's response, is to say, you don't have that power. You know, we can't empower every district court judge in the country to set national policy. The primary issue, as I've said before the court, is whether lower court judges can issue what are known as universal injunctions to block an order nationwide. We have in round numbers, because I'm not positive to this, but I'm 96% sure that I'm going to come close. There are about 95 U.S. district courts in the United States and about 700 district judges, not including magistrates. And by the way, these district judges are lifetime appointees. They are lifetime appointees, just like the Supreme Court of the United States. They don't get enough attention because they wield tremendous power. So the Trump administration is saying, we can't possibly empower 700 different people to set national policy. You know, it's one thing if it gets to the Supreme Court of the United States and they make a determination on something like birthright citizenship, but that's not the intent. That's not the way in which our government, the three branches of government, were established. On the birthright citizenship issue, here's the language. It's the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, Section 1. I'm going to emphasize some words. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. That clause, born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, that's the foundation of birthright citizenship. So what is the Trump administration saying? The Trump administration says that the Constitution's citizenship clause, which provides that everybody who's born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, does not give everybody who's born in the United States automatic citizenship. That's what the Trump administration say. They say that people who are born in the United States must be subject to the jurisdiction, which they say hinges on whether someone owes allegiance to and is entitled to protection from the United States. Where do they find that language? They really can't in the Constitution. But they say that children whose parents are in the country temporarily or without proper documentation are not subject to the political jurisdiction of the United States because they say they don't have an allegiance to the United States, rather than simply being required to follow U.S. law. So lots of constitutional and legal scholars say no matter how or why you're in the United States, you're required to follow our laws. Consequently, you are subject to the political jurisdiction. The Trump administration, I think, on weak ground, I want to make it clear, I think they're on weak ground from a constitutional perspective. They're saying, no, that's not what subject to the political jurisdiction means. That means you've got an allegiance to the U.S. above wherever you came from. You can't find that in the Constitution. I think, and I've said this before, that there's a legitimate conversation to be had in this country. In fact, we're having it right now about birthright citizenship. But this is not the way to go about it. You shouldn't be able to get rid of birthright citizenship, something that's perceived as being enshrined in the Constitution and through legal precedent, including the Supreme Court of the United States, by executive order. I think it's a dangerous precedent. Okay, have I made that abundantly clear? I don't think that the Supreme Court of the United States in this injunction case should enable the Trump administration to get rid of birthright citizenship by executive order. All right, I think I've made that clear. But if there were, through proper channels, a constitutional amendment, I think this is a legitimate conversation. I mean, we are in a distinct minority. It's us in Canada, of developed nations. And other nations are going in the other direction. I'll explain that in just a moment. What's Trump's response? Trump's response is, and he said this after he came into office and signed an executive order, quote, "That's not about tourists coming in and touching a piece of sand, and then suddenly there's citizenship. This is about slavery." Why did he say it? Because for more than a century, most scholars in the courts have agreed that there's a tie between the 14th Amendment added to the Constitution and the Civil War, which it was following. Many say it was not just about slavery, though. The courts have held that the amendment extended citizenship not just to the children of former slaves, but also to babies born within the borders of the United States. The New York Times coverage on this says, and in their headline, they say, this used to be a fringe theory. The idea that there shouldn't be birthright citizenship used to be a fringe theory, and they credit or blame a California law professor who was once a guest of mine, John Eastman. He was my guest on CNN. I'm not sure if he was my guest on POTUS, but he and his colleagues at the Claremont Institute, a conservative think tank, by the way, same professor who provided Trump with legal arguments that he used to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Eastman apparently is the one who put a bug in Trump's ear directly or indirectly and said, there's actually a constitutional argument to be made, Mr. President, to get rid of birthright citizenship. The allegiance argument that I've already shared with you. And this is kind of interesting because when you say California, law professor, conservative, constitutional scholar, at the top of my list would not be John Eastman from Claremont, but it would be a different John Yoo from Berkeley. And remember, because John Yoo has often been a guest of mine here on POTUS, it's John Yoo best known for providing the legal justification to President George W. Bush's administration for there to be harsh interrogation of Guantanamo detainees. And yet he hangs his hat at Berkeley. I saw him just a week ago. Just a week ago, John Yoo was in Philadelphia. In fact, he'll be back in studio with me here. He sort of makes an annual visit when he comes to Philadelphia to visit his mom, which I love, and comes in studio and we talk about the news of the day. John Yoo and John Eastman disagree on this. As a matter of fact, John Yoo to the New York Times, they, meaning the antagonists to birthright citizenship, have been pushing this for years quote, I thought it was a wacky idea that only political philosophers would buy, but they finally have a president who agrees. Okay, so even John Yoo, the conservative legal scholar, is saying this is constitutionally unsound. But I'm still asking, put the Constitution aside for a moment and just ask yourself in the abstract. Should someone born to parents who are illegally in the United States or temporarily in the United States, Trump's word, a tourist, be automatically provided citizenship? Here's the argument, and here's some additional data. Proponents of the policy have pointed to birthright citizenship as a cornerstone of what it means to be an American, part of the national ethos of the country as a place that is open to everyone, regardless of faith, color, or creed. Of the world's 20 most developed countries, only Canada and the United States grant automatic citizenship to children born within its borders. In a brief before the Supreme Court, an immigrant advocacy group argued that birthright citizenship is at the core of the nation's fundamental precepts that all people born on our soil are created equal regardless of their parentage. State attorneys general who are challenging the current Trump policy weighed in with a brief that argued that this has already been settled. It's a case called United States versus Wong Kim Ark. That is a 1898 case. Danny Savalos in our CLE presentation the other day was talking extensively about this. So I have the list in front of me. The BBC recently published Where Do Other Countries Stand? And their coverage began this way. President Trump's executive order to end birthright citizenship in the U.S. has sparked a Supreme Court legal challenge along with anxiety among immigrant families. For nearly 160 years, the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution has established the principle that anyone born in the country is a U.S. citizen. But as part of his crackdown on migration numbers, Trump is seeking to deny citizenship to children of migrants who are either in the country illegally or on temporary visas. The move appears to have public backing. This is interesting. We'll see how my poll plays out. A January poll by Emerson College suggests more Americans back Trump than oppose him on this. Birthright citizenship, or just solely the right of the soil, is not the norm globally. The U.S. is about one of 30 countries, mostly in the Americas, that grant automatic citizenship to anyone born within their borders. In contrast, many countries in Asia, Europe, and parts of Africa adhere to the jus sanguinis, or the right of blood principle, where children inherit their nationality from their parents regardless of their birthplace. I mean, that's really it. Should you inherit your citizenship from your parents, or should it be tied to your birthplace? One last detail, if I may. Countries with unconditional birthright citizenship. This is from Al Jazeera, relying on the CIA. Okay? So here's the company we keep on this. This is the company we keep on this. Antigua, Barbuda, Argentina. Barbados, Belize, Bolivia, Brazil, Canada, I emphasize because the only other really fully developed country on this list, Chile, Costa Rica, Cuba, Dominica, Ecuador, El Salvador, Gambia, Grenada, Guatemala, Guyana, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, St. Kitts, Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, the Grenadines, Trinidad, Tobago, Tuvalu, the United States, Uruguay, Venezuela. It's us and Canada in the developed world that recognize birthright citizenship. Okay, you don't have to get all legal with me in answering today's poll question. Just go to smirconish.com and cast your ballot. Should citizenship be automatically granted to those born in the United States to parents who are in the country illegally or temporarily? Go vote. like and subscribe, and set yourself up for notifications. Great poll question. This is going to be really interesting to see how it turns out. See you, gang.